Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Impact with Elle. I'm really excited to have you with me, and I hope that we are all going to learn and discuss and continue the dialogue. To that end, I actually am continuing a dialogue that I started a few weeks ago. It started with the Texas power outage, and kind of that became a discussion about renewables and energy and climate change, and I'm expanding that. I'm going to read a little bit today, so you have to pardon me if I'm looking down, but there are a lot of facts and I want to go through them. So one of the things that people talk a lot about is global warming, but you guys should know that that term is a misnomer now. They got rid of it almost a decade ago because it shifted to climate change, because it wasn't warming anymore so much as it had plateaued and even had some cooling years. So now it should be called climate change. And, that in and of itself is a whole other discussion. But what I want to talk about is, first of all, climate change is truly a redundant term. This is the Earth, and there is a lot of change in this beautiful, amazing planet that we inhabit. And that has been the case throughout the entire history of this planet. And so to think that it's only changing now is a very, very nearsighted view. We've looked at ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica, and they show that temperatures can swing pretty dramatically in pretty short periods of time, like 20 degrees Fahrenheit in a century. So that's a pretty big change that's been going on, throughout not just human history, but let's say Earth history. Greenhouse gases themselves make up 2% of the Earth's atmosphere. Water vapor is actually the majority of what we call greenhouse gases, and CO2 is a very small part of that. 0.04% of that is actually CO2. Man-made CO2 is expected to be at 0.5% of that amount that's out there. So pretty small amounts. And so I just want to get some sort of perspective in the discussion. CO2 is actually an incredibly important part of what we have on Earth, and it is elementally important to plants and lots of life, including our own life. The dinosaurs lived in a vastly higher CO2 environment than we have today. And I don't think a lot of people can really appreciate that. Most of the CO2 on Earth is actually trapped in the ocean itself. And what's interesting about that is another fact of physics about the fact that temperatures lead CO2. It's not the other way around, and that's kind of simple physics, and people don't really understand that very well. One of the big reasons is because of the oceans. So as the oceans and temperatures warm, the water releases some of that CO2, and so CO2 levels rise. So that's a pretty standard thing that's happened, and it is, again, just simple science and physics. I want to also bring up the fact that, some of the biggest impacts on climate in this planet have nothing to do with what is going on the planet itself. It can be primarily from solar flares, solar activity, the tilt of the Earth's axis, the influence of the moon, magnetic flares, Milankovitch cycles. I mean, you name it. These things have a far bigger impact on our planet. Asteroids, didn't even mention that one. Obviously, that wiped out the dinosaurs. But let's not get into really scary stuff, because we can't do anything about that, at least not yet. But in any event, civilizations have thrived in a lot higher CO2 levels than we have today. That would include Egyptian, Minoan, Roman, medieval. These are all much hotter periods than we are experiencing today. And I think that, we need to kind of tamp down the fear factor a little bit here. In the last 120 years, we have seen an increase from 1900 to 1940. Between 1940 and almost 1980, temperatures actually declined. So much so that there was a cover of Time magazine that was talking about a new ice age. And there was a lot of discussion of scientists and political leaders and possibly doing things to create a hotter environment, from seeding clouds, releasing sulfuric acid, you name it. Obviously that has changed since the 1980s, but that wasn't that long ago. So I think, again, I'm just asking for a little perspective here. You know, another thing is on that note is, you know, what is going on in terms of our energy usage and pollution and so on. One of my big concerns is pollution, smog, dirty air. Nobody likes that. I don't want that. Nobody wants that. So I think we need to address improving things that we can do for air quality, other kinds of pollution, recycling, you name it. These are all big challenges, and I think we should tackle those head on and not get off on a tangent that isn't really helpful, and it doesn't really actually have a productive direction. You know, I think one of the things we're going to face this year is we're already seeing the prices at the pump increasing, and that's going to continue to get worse. That's because of inflation, which I've talked about before, but you know, the trade deficit is going to continue to weaken with the fact that we aren't making as much oil and gas in the US as we did a year ago, and so therefore we're importing it, which has a whole host of economic and environmental implications. So, you know, we can talk about that later, but I would rather save the environment and produce here than import it. But, you know, one of the interesting things as I was reading through a lot of this data was, you know, people want to do the shift to renewables, which I think we should continue to strive to advance technology. That is hugely important. We should always work towards a better solution. But we need to understand the full spectrum of what we're doing, the impact of those regulations, and not artificially create things that aren't useful. So, you know, we want to limit coal-fired power. I think everybody agrees on that. But the reality is China and India are building coal plants faster than you can say Jack Robinson. And, you know, if we don't have a global perspective on this, we are only hurting ourselves. I'm not advocating building coal plants here by any means. But what I am saying is that when we need to understand that this is a global situation and we cannot control what other countries are doing. In fact, a lot of the coal plants that are being built in China are helping to develop the batteries that we're using for our you know, electric cars. And so when you start weighing the cost benefit analysis there, it just doesn't add up. And so again, I would just encourage everybody to dig in and really understand what is happening from a truly broad perspective. Yeah, you know, I think there's a lot to dig into here. I'll do another discussion. I have some posts on Facebook. I would encourage you to see those. I'm putting out a lot of literature on that. So my better half is a geoscientist and an environmental engineer. So he's a great resource and one that I've relied on that's put together some pretty interesting white papers. So I hope you'll take a look. I really look forward to more dialogue on this. I think it's a really important topic. I think we actually have common ground in that no matter what side politically you are on, I think we all want a better environment. We want to protect our world and we want to do the best that we can. And I think that fundamentally is a common ground that we need to build from without anger and without bias.